Welcome to the deep dive. So you've sent over some really fascinating material on a case that just seems to have endless twists, the Karen Reed case, focusing on John O'Keefe's death. It feels like we need to maybe set aside preconceptions here.
Absolutely. And our mission for this deep dive is, well, pretty clear. We want to really examine the timeline of what happened the night John O'Keefe died, January 29th, 2022. We're using everything you shared, online comments, news articles, and that really intriguing MADOT crash report.
Yeah, that report is something else. And we're looking at all these different angles, right? From what people were saying online right away to the official documents, even some expert takes mixed in. The idea isn't just to retell the story, but to find the spots where things don't quite line up.
Exactly. So the big question we're digging into is, does the official timeline, the one presented in the case, actually hold up when you start comparing it with all this other information? Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with the prosecution's initial narrative. Basically, they claimed Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe with her SUV near 34 Fairview Road, and the time they kept pointing to was around 12:45 a.m. that night.
Right. And, at first glance, maybe that seemed like the simplest explanation. We saw some comments you sent suggesting that it felt like the most obvious answer before all the other details started trickling out. People often go for the straightforward story first.
But then, bam, this MADOT crash report you highlighted, it really complicates things immediately. It was logged at 12:33 a.m. on January 29th, 2022. And the location, the coordinates listed are exactly where John O'Keefe's body was eventually found.
Yeah, and the details in that report are, well, they really jump out. It's marked down as a non-fatal injury. And there's even a note saying deceased, not caused by crash. Plus, it mentions the driver's age as being between 35 and 44.
Okay, so wait. That raises a ton of questions right off the bat, doesn't it? An official report at 12:33 a.m. at the scene, 12 minutes before the prosecution said it happened. Who even filed that? And why non-fatal and deceased, not caused by crash? I mean, what does that mean in this context? And yeah, the huge question, why wasn't this thing front and center during the trial?
Precisely. This 12:33 a.m. report, documented officially at that specific location, it just immediately challenges that 12:45 a.m. timeline. And it gets even more tangled when you layer in other data points we have.
Like the Apple Health data.
Exactly. John O'Keefe's device apparently registered some kind of trauma event at 12:32 a.m. So literally 1 minute before this crash report timestamp.
Wow.
And then just 3 minutes after the crash report, at 12:36 a.m., Karen Reed's phone reportedly connects to the Wi-Fi network at John O'Keefe's house.
So let me just get this straight. Potential trauma on his phone at 12:32. An official crash report at the scene at 12:33. And then her phone connects to his home Wi-Fi at 12:36. Meanwhile, the prosecution was saying the incident happened around 12:45. How does that even work? If the crash report relates to John, it creates a huge timing conflict.
It really does. I mean, think about it practically. If something involving her vehicle happened at 34 Fairview at 12:33 a.m., could she really have driven from there to John's house in a blizzard, reportedly in an area she didn't know well, and connected to his Wi-Fi just 3 minutes later? That seems incredibly fast.
Yeah, and people online in the comments you sent were pointing that out too, saying it seems almost impossible to make that trip and connect Wi-Fi so quickly under those conditions. And didn't the prosecution sort of adjust their timeline later on?
Well, recordedly, yes. During closing arguments, it seems they started defining near 12:45 a.m., more like maybe 12:59 a.m. But even if you shift it that early, it still happens before this 12:33 a.m. crash report. It still doesn't quite fit,
So those details in the crash report become even more critical. Non-fatal injury. Deceased, not caused by crash. What could that imply about his state at 12:33? Did first responders think he was alive then, or that something else happened? It's confusing.
Very confusing. And another interesting detail, the report was apparently entered by the Massachusetts State Police, not Canton PD, which suggests the state police were involved very early on, maybe earlier than the main narrative suggests.
Okay, that's another layer.
And there's a key procedural point here, too. The record itself mentions it's protected under a federal statute, 23 U.S.C. Section 407. Basically, this means it was collected for traffic safety data analysis, not as forensic evidence for this specific case.
So it couldn't actually be used as evidence in the trial itself.
That's the implication. So while it raises all these huge questions for us looking at the timeline, it wasn't something the jury would have seen directly to challenge the prosecution's case.
Okay, that makes sense why it wasn't argued directly in court, but it still leaves these big questions hanging. Now, what about the physical evidence? Does it strongly support the idea she hit him fatally with the car? Dr. Wrenchler had some points on this, right?
Yes, his testimony was significant. He talked about what a center mass strike at, say, 15 mile per hour would likely do damage to tendons, ligaments, the cervical spine, things like that.
Right.
But he also noted that the head injuries John had, like skull fractures at the back of the head, seemed inconsistent with being hit by a vehicle at, say, 24 mile per hour without other major injuries to the rest of his body.
So the injury pattern didn't quite match a typical high-speed vehicle strike.
That was his assessment. And he also talked about a sideswipe scenario. He suggested a sideswipe would probably cause very little damage to a person and wouldn't move them much, which kind of clashes with the idea that John was thrown onto the lawn.
Okay. And again, that echoes some of the things we saw in the comments, people asking, where are the broken legs? The severe bruising you'd expect if a nearly 7,000-pound SUV hit someone. The physics felt off to some observers.
Exactly. And another point raised related to Dr. Wrenchler's testimony, I believe, was about the taillight on Karen Reed's Lexus. The idea that it shattered, hitting his arm, but without causing apparently massive trauma to the arm itself or sending the body flying, that seemed inconsistent to him.
So all these questions about the timeline and the physical evidence, they naturally make you wonder about other possibilities. And the online discussions certainly go there mentioning theories about something happening inside the house.
Sure. And the defense really hammered on the lack of definitive GPS data, proving her car was right there at the impact spot at the exact time the prosecution claimed.
Right, the GPS data or lack thereof. Wasn't there some effort by the prosecution to re-examine the car's electronics after the defense did their own thing?
Yes. The prosecution wanted to try and potentially recover more data, maybe GPS tracks, after the defense had already done what's called a chip-off procedure on the car's systems.
And there was that whole debate about whether it was an aftermarket system in her Lexus or the original one, which might have GPS logs. If it was the original Lexus system, the chances of finding location data would presumably be higher.
Correct. And things like the Oakdale stop theory, the idea she might have stopped somewhere before Fairview Road, that also seems to depend heavily on finding concrete GPS evidence, which hasn't clearly emerged as far as we know.
Okay, switching gears slightly. The online comments you shared also get into some pretty serious concerns about the investigation itself. Allegations of bad faith testimony, claims about video being flipped or manipulated.
Yeah, accusations of a rigged trial even. There's definitely a strong current of thought among some commentators that this case is less about the specific incident and more about potential corruption or misconduct within law enforcement or politics.
And that leads to this fear, which you see in the comments, that any evidence pointing away from Karen Reed might get buried or ignored. Understandably, that makes people skeptical about a fair outcome, even in a retrial.
It does. But it's also fair to say not everyone online sees it that way. We also saw comments expressing some hope, maybe thinking that District Attorney Morrissey's influence is waning, or that just one juror finding reasonable doubt could change things.
And the phone data stuff keeps coming up, too. The whole butt dial testimony, Jennifer McCabe's deleted calls, questions about John O'Keefe's own phone activity after he was found. It's all fuel for speculation.
Absolutely. And you also flagged the detail about the lead investigator, Michael Proctor, and a key witness, Matthew McCabe, apparently attending a golf tournament together. Things like that inevitably raise questions about impartiality for some observers.
Okay, so wrapping this up, it feels like the biggest takeaway from this deep dive is just how many inconsistencies and, frankly, unanswered questions there are around the timeline. That 12.33 a.m. DOT report is just, it's huge. It directly conflicts with the prosecution's initial story.
Definitely. And for you, our listener, wanting to get a quick but solid grasp on this, hopefully, focusing on these timeline issues and the conflicts has helped clarify at least that aspect of this complex case.
Yeah, because it's these discrepancies, like the DOT report clashing with the alleged time of the incident, that create those aha, or maybe, wait, what moments, where you start to really question the official narrative.
Absolutely. What we've seen across all the sources, the comments, the reports, the expert testimony, is a really messy, often contradictory picture. It just highlights how tough it is to pin down exactly what happened when the pieces don't seem to fit together cleanly.
So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. Given that 12.33 a.m. DOT report exists, with its specific location and notes, what does that really mean for how we should understand this whole case, how it's been presented? It definitely encourages a lot more critical thinking about all the information out there.
Indeed. It prompts you to keep digging, keep questioning the narrative presented. A very complex situation, no doubt.